everybody know who our great grandfather and grandmother were? Lived at Odina. They settled. They settled there. I'm going from memory, but in 1849, and they built a log house, or it was one big log room, and then it had a loft in it, and where you could go upstairs and sleep. And they had that bunch of children. By the time the Civil War came, Joseph Wesson went off to the Civil War and never came back. And we have recently found that you can read some letters that he wrote back to her and to the children on the internet. There's a it's called Private Lives, isn't it?
Private Voices.
Private Voices. That someone at the University of Georgia has compiled lots and lots of letters that were written during the Civil War. And you can Google Private Voices and then go to Joseph Wesson and get these horribly sad letters that he wrote back to my great grandmother, Grandma Jane, all thing I'd ever heard. She survived him by a long time. I think she lived to be 92, and she's buried at the Odina Baptist Church Cemetery. When we had a reunion at my house about probably 45 years ago, we took up a collection to put a marker on her grave because she never had a marker. I think she died in 1922. But 21, okay. They had several children to die with diabetes. You know, my father was a diabetic. Uncle Lonzer was a diabetic. My brother was a diabetic. Maggie Wesson, who married Marvin Boland, died with diabetes young, and she had one son, Wesley Boland, that used to come around. He's been dead about probably 25 years now. Nancy had diabetes. And see, they didn't know what it was. And Daddy went to work in the tire factories in Ohio as a young man, and the doctors at the tire factory discovered that's what it was. Yeah. Well, Grandma Jane in the woods out there raised those children, and two of the sons married sisters. They married Harvilles. Our grandfather that went by the name Tobe, Anderson Dudley Wesson. And I have found that Aunt Pearl was right. And one thing in his wife's writing, she spelled his name A-N-S-T-O-N, Anston. No, she spelled it in her handwriting in the Bible that his name was A-N-S-T-O-N. But in the census and all, it shows it Anderson Dudley Wesson. But Aunt Pearl always said he was named Anniston for the town Anniston. But Anniston wasn't even a town. Anniston, the name Anniston was made up from a corruption of Annie's Town, who was a woman that owned a saloon up there. And that's how Anniston got its name. So, yeah. So, you go. All right. And Rachel Jane, my great grandmother, she fell as an elderly lady and broke her hip, and was taken to a doctor's house in Fayetteville. I'm trying to think of that doctor's name. And the two-story house is still down there, and she ended up dying in bedroom up there in that house. It goes by the Edwards house later, but I can't think of that doctor's name. But anyhow, they took her on a wagon with a broken hip to Fayetteville, to the doctor. Their children were Martha Ellen, who married the Holmes, married George Holmes. A bunch of their descendants are still in Sylacauga. Then John Lewis Wesson, and I don't know what happened to him. I think he's the one that lived on the Odin's Mill Road, not far from Highway 280. And there's a log barn there and a house, and his descendants still own that property. And then, so Anderson Dudley, my grandfather, many of you's great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather, was the third child. He was born in 1855. So he would have been about 6 years old when his father went off the Civil War. And in reading those letters, his father addresses to sometime to Tobe and sometime to Anderson. No, called him Dudley one time, didn't he? I think he did. You have to read the letters. They're wonderful, and they are written as
AD.
they're
They were online. I found them online on a website called Private Voices, and it was out of University of Georgia. They did transcribe the letters and put them online.
and they, I mean it's just he's just in a horrible physical
Private Voices.
condition,
I've got some
and
copies. I'll set you some.
and
You can read them too.
no, they're too long, and they're
I'll
in
cry.
they're
if I
written.
do.
They are written. You have to study it because they're not. The spelling is phonetic. Spelling did not get universal until after the Civil War, and so people wrote things as it sounded. So he would say, "I have no news," N-U-S-E,
And yo children was wild.
and you've got to study it to
Okay, and
understand
they're
what he said.
private voices, but what do we look for?
Joseph Edgar
Joseph.
Wesson.
If you put
If you
that
just
in
hit
on
the
there,
search.
it'll start pulling.
If
So
you hit the
that's where
search,
it
it'll come
came
up
from.
saying Joseph.
Yeah, this is coming from the University of Georgia in Athens.
And how they got these letters, I don't know.
We don't know. We don't know.
It makes you wonder if they never got delivered.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
They never
This
left
is
the
the
Well-
one I told you that I was the first one that I was sort of reading it so I could understand it. So
All right,
when
read it
read
to
these
Send the letters to Jane by mail.
Just to give you a sample now,
So he was
because
in,
these are what, 8 letters?
it was 8 letters. He was at Camp Stonewall, in Mississippi. Well, this may have
Camp
been
Stonewall was in Talladega.
Talladega.
This
This was
Talladega.
before he was
But he
transferred
went
over
to
to.
he went to Mississippi
Vicksburg.
later, and it was in January. It says January the 7th, 1863. And he called her Jane. So he says, "Well, Jane, it is with pleasure that I set myself to let you and the children know that I am in the land of the living. And I ain't well, Jane. You know how my head, back, and hips has caused me to suffer. I am just able to go. It's real broken up. So I am just able to go. I hope these lines will find you and the children all well, Jane. I have not any news to write to you. I am in what I call the penitentiary. Jane." He said her name a lot. I thought that's what tore me up. I want you to write to me as soon as you can. Say to me how you," and I'm not sure what that is. It said met, M-E-T, "is doing, and your horse and pigs."
That's
So he's-
meat.
Meat?
How you meet.
Okay.
You still have him,
All right. All right.
if you're hungry.
Well, that makes sense now. Okay. I want you to be saying what your meat, corn, as you can say to me how your pigs and cows is doing. I was on guard last night and I have got the headache very bad. Jane, I'm sorry that I can't see you and you to tie my head up. Like I want it to be. John, I want you and, was there a Billy?
William.
To be smart boys and to try to learn your books as you can. Martha, I want you to be a smart girl and try to learn it and to write to me later. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
I cry every time I read them.
Take your pad.
It's down.
Jane, take care of the children and yourself. You know you. And there's a question mark. It's illegible. I think of you many times when you are asleep. They are bringing prisoners in every day to this place, Jane. I will try to get to come home as soon as I can. You must excuse my bad writing, for I have got a bad way of writing. My mess is eating dinner. Don't know what.
What mess?
My mess is eating dinner.
Mess hall.
But
Mess hall to eat.
I don't want none of the beef. The bread is hard. Living and but little of that. I would give a heap to be at home. William Russell, as well as Coleman. William Russell lived about a mile through the woods from the Wessons, and he was my great-grandfather on my mother's side, and that house is still standing. William Russell, as well as Common Wright, will write how Russell's family is. I must close by subscribing myself your affectionate husband and father until death. And he is just that loving in every letter. But the ailments he has just get worse. And he tells about how he was sick and had dysentery and had measles, and it just goes on. It just goes on and on. And it tells about he had to sell his blanket to get some food to eat and things like that. It's just.
I cry every time I read them. I cry every time I read them.
Pigs and cows and stuff, because
Yeah.
normally people in South didn't have anything during the.
Well, now see, he keeps telling her to write, but she didn't sign her name on documents that I've read. She made an X. But he could write. She was blind when she died, and I think she was deaf. And she stayed in her house, which had a few more rooms added on it. And I think your Uncle Fred's family lived there. When did they live? When did y'all live in that house?
Oh gosh, I don't remember.
It was, Jewel was born in Silicaca. I know it was prior to that.
So it was prior to that.
Yeah, I think they built the house in Silicaca about the time Jewel was born.
Okay.
So it was, Gertrude lived in, if you remember, Grandma, there in the old house.
And it was about maybe 350 yards from Tobe Wesson, my grandfather's house.
And my house is
And
where,
Sue's house is on the site where the log cabin sat.
I remember Grandma I was about 5 years old, and I remember going and spending the night there, but that's about all I remember, that and the funeral.
The
So I
Mama
was
Wesson
about 5
house.
years old.
Not Grandma Jane's house, but Mama Wesson house.
Mama Wesson.
Yeah. And so I don't know, there was some kind of uncomfortable feelings among the children of Joseph and Jane. It seems like it fell to Anderson Dudley took care of Grandma Jane the rest of her life. And one of the children would go over there and spend the night with her every night and take her dinner. And Aunt Pearl told me that it was her turn to go, and that she spent the night. She slept in the bed with Grandma Jane, and they had a fire in the fireplace. And she said it was one of the coldest nights she had ever seen, and snow was on the ground. And when she got up the next morning, the cat was on the was on the hearth there, and it had frozen to death. According to Aunt Pearl now. And Aunt Pearl said she was told by Grandma Jane to take the cat off and throw it off out in the woods somewhere. So she took it by the tail. She said she's just a little old girl, and she took the cat by the tail. She slung it off in the bushes, and she went on back to the house. And she said about 3 hours later, that cat came crawling back up to the house. And Tobe Wesson and Bernie Wesson, who I think his name was George, wasn't he?
Yeah, George Burns.
They married sisters, and they were Harvards. And their daddy taught the school And those Harvilles were born in Louisiana. And their daddy, the Harville man, taught the school called Fulton Gap School, which was a little log schoolhouse right near where 280 crosses that Fulton Gap Mountain there. And there was a spring up there, and the schoolhouse sat there in the yard, and my grandmother went to school there. My grandmother Wallace went to school there. She was a Russell, and she said that our ancestor Harville that taught the school, she said he had a set of books. They didn't go a certain number of years. They just went till you learned what he had in his books, and when he felt like you had learned his books, he sent you home. And so that was your graduation day, I guess. And but we've been able to go back from Joseph Edgar Wesson, that his father was William N. or William H. Wesson. It shows it N some places on the census, and it shows it H someplace on the census. And he came from Brunswick County, Virginia. And you can go back 2 more generations of Wessons to confirm his ancestors in Virginia there. But he came to North Alabama because when the state first formed, besides Mobile, there was lots of settlement in Madison County and around in Huntsville. And that's where they lived until the Wessons came on down to Talladega County when that land opened up. And William N. Wesson and his wife, whose name was Patsy, which must be a nickname for Martha, and his wife Patsy Cunningham, Willingham, and they came on down to Talladega County with they still had young children, but they also had our ancestor, and I think one more that was already grown and married that lived there. Yes, sir.
When I took the class at AUM, we were going through genealogy, and one of the ladies took back, and of course, you know, never know when somebody shows something, whether what they found was true or not. But they were showing that Virginia, some of them came in from Massachusetts, but they were spelled Weston. Did you ever find anything that changed to that nature? And they were during the Revolutionary War and all.
I haven't gone back.
Well, I even found one that said that we're descended from this Wesson that was on the Mayflower. Well, there wasn't a Wesson on the Mayflower. You know, you just can find all kind of stuff. But until in the 1890s, everything was spelled however you heard it.
Yeah, right.
It didn't matter,
Yeah.
you know. And like me and Aunt Pearl getting in this argument of what Anderson's name was.
Yeah.
It's just you know, and lazy Southern speech probably changed a lot of things.
Yeah,
Wesson, W-S-S-E-N.
yeah, because the O made it look like an E when they wrote it or something like that.
And see the census taker spelled it as he heard it.
Exactly. You didn't know what they were about to write.
Yeah.
Or they'd leave off a child when you knew the child had to be there because the child was old enough, should have been on the register.
Yeah, because Granddaddy was left off one of the censuses, but then there were 2 brothers that I think may have been actually cousins, because
They were probably in the same at the house.
they were at the house that day or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was one of
Well,
the censuses.
we were talking earlier that with Jewel about you know Aunt Daisy and Mother and all that when one of them was nursing a baby and it was sick and she was sick, you know, just the sister-in-law had to feed that baby.
Yeah, absurd.
So the people just kind of did for each other, probably. It looks like.
We don't know who got the benefit of mother's largesse, whether it was you or Bobby or who.
Well, I've got a little bit, I
Well,
thought was,
mother had told me that Aunt Daisy had gotten sick
Oh, okay.
when she was nursing a child,
Yeah.
so mother had to share Audra's milk with
a
somebody.
little bit of information I thought was interesting. Our granddad, A.D.,
Have them come out here
worked
and
for
pick
a
it up.
company called Alonzo
They
Bliss.
installed it.
medical company.
Yeah.
And he named Uncle Woodrow Bliss and Uncle Lance after that. I just thought that was extremely interesting.
He
Somebody in the family, and I can't remember who it was, had a medicine cabinet that had that name on it.
Yeah, Grandpa had it, yeah, sure did.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, at the fireplace.
well, he must have been a cutter. We have his picture. We have his family's picture, and it's got Grandma Jane in the picture, and I'm sure it's on that thing. We were at a reunion one time, or a funeral. I don't know which, but somebody was talking about Tobe Wesson had gotten drunk, and he fell over in the pig pen. And Mama Wesson was trying to get him out of there, and Grandma Jane said, just leave him right there. It serves him right, and he'll just stay there till he sobers up. And so I guess he stayed in the pig pen.
That was not my daddy, though.
But he sold this I don't know if it was cough syrup or elixir or what, but he would also butcher a cow or butcher a pig or whatever and go sell the meat while he was selling the stuff. So he was right industrious. That's one thing you can say about this bunch of Wessons, at least our parents' generation. They did for themselves. They did hard. They
And
worked
I
hard.
think they pretty much passed that on to all of us. Pretty much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you take care of your own.
Just made everybody work hard.
That's right.
I went in and he was telling me to carry it somehow. We were in a project is where we were.
Yeah.
That was what I
He said take this watermelon to house so and so. Well, I dropped the watermelon. So I went back and I told Grandpa that I dropped the watermelon and busted it up before I got it to the house. He said, "Where's the watermelon?" I said, "The street." He said, "You better go get that watermelon right now and bring it back home." So they were going to get it and eat it, and they wouldn't
Yeah.
pay for a watermelon.
Yeah.
So I went and got that watermelon.
Ethel Holmes had a picture of Big Mama, Rachel Jones, that was like from here up. It was a close-up picture of her face. And I was, I don't know, maybe 14 years old. And they lived across the street from us when we lived across the street. And he called me over there one day and he was going to give me that picture. And in fact, I did have it in my hand. And his daughter, Airedale, came in and she said, "Papa, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm giving Martha Ellen this picture." And she reached over and got it. And she said, "No, you're not." I almost had it. Her sister now that lives somewhere in North Alabama has got it on. Her sisters, some of her sisters' children. But I know that her sister got it when Airedale died. And I don't know if that sister's probably dead now.
That was the Western family line of 40,000 Alabama, which was what the regiment
Yeah.
was in.
Oh.
But it kind of goes along with the things that he was writing in those letters.
Because I know that'll worry about who's sitting here.
How they went in and how they treated us.
That's where Uncle Monroe got that name, Bliss Monroe. That Bliss made for her, that A.D. Wesson sold.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a son. My youngest son, his middle name's Bliss. They're expecting a little girl next month. Her middle name's gonna be Bliss.
Bliss kind of means happy to me.
Huh?
Bliss
That's a nice one.
means happy to me. So.
Yeah. Well, that's what it means, happiness. Daddy didn't like his name, that's Bliss. He did not like it. That's why he went by Monroe or Bliss.
I know. I'm just saying that, but they were already born by the time he was.
Well, somebody Dudley needs to tell something about him.
That's Lincoln. And this is his twin brother.
Hey, you're talking about the cold weather one.
Yeah.
I remember when we were living in that house down the Mama's old house. The walls didn't have any kind of paper on it, no kind of insulation on it at all. And I could lay in my bed and through the cracks in the wall see the cars go down the road at night by seeing the lights through the cracks in there. Daddy kept a water bucket in the same room that Mom and Daddy and me and Junior slept in. And kept a water bucket by the fire, and I got up one morning to get a drink of water, and the water was frozen. The dipper was frozen in the bucket of water in the same room we were sleeping in by the fireplace. So you can imagine how cold the old house was. You couldn't turn over. You had so many planks and quilts that you couldn't turn.
Oh yeah, they was mad.
Watermelons.
Thank you, baby.